All right. Here with us is Dakota Christian. She's a UFO enthusiast and researcher. And she has a few books of photographs that she has taken personally. And we're excited to hear more about your story. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you grew up?
Well, I'm out of Washington State, and I was raised in the suburb of Seattle. But for everybody outside of Seattle, we just say Seattle. So there was a lot of activity in this state there, and there continues to be. We are one of the number one states in the country as far as alien abductions and UFO sightings. There's, of course, a whole plethora of different things that has happened in our state. And so I was raised in this suburb, and I had an experience, my first experience, which kind of alarmed me. And I was probably about 7 or 8. And I remember seeing a scoop mark out of the back of my left calf. And that in itself, by itself, wasn't alarming, except I had seen this a couple times before, but it was like a moment of where I just woke up and spiritually woke up and said, hey, this wasn't there yesterday. Something is not right. And it seemed like the moment I came to recognize that, the scoop marks stopped. And so I sort of forgot about it, kind of left it alone. And around that age, we, my siblings and I had an experience in the late 70s, early 80s. I think it's late 70s. We were going to our cousin's birthday party, and it had gone on for a few hours in another city. And I, um, I had a very bizarre experience in the car on the way home. So my sister and I, my siblings, we were asleep in the back seat. It was about 10 p.m. It was a little bit dark outside, but I remember it in the summer. It seemed like it was the summer because it got dark later. And I had fallen asleep, and my sister fell asleep, my siblings. We were unusually tired, and we woke up to the screaming of my mother, who was sitting in the passenger seat, saying to my dad, did you just see that? And he was driving, and he said, no, and was confused. She said there was a green light that just turned on over our car, and we were on the freeway when it happened. So the green light completely encased our car, and we woke up to the sheer panic of my mother screaming, what is that? What is that? We saw her looking out in the sky, and it had zipped off or whatever it was, and she didn't really get a good look. But that panic always stuck with me, that something unknown had happened to her, and she didn't know how to handle it. And if she should be afraid, I should be afraid. And I didn't know what to do about it. I was just a child. And we kind of like put it out of our minds, and it wasn't that, uh, I guess, not big of a deal. I sort of forgot about it. And then I heard us, probably around 8 years old too, I heard my grandmother talking about an incident that happened in her small town. So this small town was an area of the Cascades, and had a lot of woods and a lot of mountains. And everybody knows there's a lot of terrain out here that many things can hide and disappear. So we were, I think me and my sister might have been in the back seat of a car, and I heard my grandmother telling my mother when she left this small town, because my mom would go pick her up on occasion to take her to our house. And she said, well, there was something that really, really strange that happened in this town. And this town was very small, so everybody knew everybody. And she was friends with the firefighters and the police. And they had said that there was a cow up inside a tree, stuck up on the tree. She didn't understand how a cow could get up there. But now we know with Linda Moulton Howe that with her cattle mutilation investigations, I now know what that was. But at the time, that completely terrified me. And in our family, on my mom's side, it was a pretty much of an open discussion about aliens and paranormal activity. And this was just openly discussed like it was no big deal. Although for me being a child, I had become scared of it. And we had an incident where my aunt was in this same small town. staying there for a time at my grandmother's house. And she had come out of a bedroom middle of the night around 2 or 3. She had to use the restroom, and she was on an upper floor. There were 2 floors. She went downstairs, used the restroom, and then she came back up and decided to look out of this window. So at the end of this hallway was there's 3 big windows and then the stairway. So when she came back up, she decided to stop at the windows and take a look at the stars. And for sure, they're really beautiful out there. There's not a lot of light pollution, so you can see a lot of things out there that you normally wouldn't see in the big city, where I was raised in the big city. And she had seen something coming out of the woods and around iridescent, wasn't really round, it was like a football shaped, but it was a little bigger than a football, and it was sort of translucent, iridescent. And this object came out of the woods and went down because it was off the side of the house, and it came around the side of the house and down the driveway like it was being steered, and it went down into town. And of course, she was terrified. And so she ran and hid under the covers, like I've done many times. And this same aunt was with my uncle, and they had seen 3 lights that formed the shape of a triangle. And there were 3 lights on the corners, but she couldn't see the structure per se. It was at night, and it was large. And so she and my uncle were like shocked. It was passing over them, and the 3 lights broke up and they started flying east, west, different directions, which surprised her because it looked like a stationary object, and it wasn't a stationary object, or maybe it was and it can break apart. I don't know. This aunt in particular, she had a few different experiences, and she talked about it openly. And my mom and her discussed a lot of things about paranormal activity. So while this was going on, also, um, my mom was heavily involved in some spiritual things. So let's just say spiritual warfare type of things. Well, I would like to say she was reading books about Bigfoot and UFOs and the Bermuda Triangle, and even serial killer books, and anything that was just a mystery she was into. And I thought that her obsession over that was a little strong, and I didn't understand really where that came from. And it made me wonder when I was early, or when I got older, I was wondering if she had been abducted or not. And we had talked about that. And she had said that, and a few years later, and well, it was about, I don't know, 80s, I think they're like mid 80s. And she was coming home from a friend's house, and it was dusk, and I know she was trying to make dinner for my dad, and she had seen this UFO. It had vertical lights. She was very adamant that the lights were vertical, and they were just fluttering up and down this vertical structure. And so she pulled off the road to take a look at it. She was mesmerized by it, and she felt entranced by it. And the next memory she had was actually being in her driveway, and it was pitch black, it was dark. So she had some missing time, and she had seen the same structure moving away from her. So at that point, she thought, well, I think something must have happened to me, because here I am, it's dark, I have no recollection of what's happening. And to preface this also, my mother was playing with the Ouija board. And so the Ouija board was a staple in our family, not but like my uncle, my aunts, my grandmother, grandfather. Back then, the Ouija board was just an innocent toy when it first came out. No one really knew how dangerous it could be. My aunt was the one that discovered that it was dangerous, so she stopped playing with that and became a born again believer. And my mother, I believe, continued playing with it up until I was 10 years old. And the reason why I'm suspicious of that and say that was because my sister and I found a Ouija board in our room up on a shelf, and we thought it was a toy. We were like 8 or 9. I thought it was a toy. So my mom's friend was over, and I ran out with this. Oh, a new game. I want to play this new game. Mom, how do you play this game? And she's like, where's the planchette? I'm like, what's a planchette? I don't even understand what you're talking about. It wasn't near there. So she took the board away, but she never got rid of it. I mean, she kept it for a while, which made me suspicious that she was still consulting the board. And the board had told her when she was going to get married, who she was going to get married to, how many kids she was going to have. And all of it was truthful, but there was a lot of chaos in our home, a lot of craziness. And, with just watching Exorcist movies when I was really young, and It's Alive, and it was very open. All of it was very open with no filter for kids. And so that instilled a lot of fear in me, and I didn't want anything to do with it. I didn't want anything to do with the paranormal. I didn't want anything to do with these stories that my family was telling me about. And I thought possibly this was something they did, or something that was attracted to them, or even an open door through playing with the Ouija boards that brought spirits to us. And our family is cursed. Like, a lot of members say that there is a curse on our family. And I believe it was because of consulting spirits and doing what they did. And I don't know if the door was ever closed for that, but I know when I left home, I was done. I didn't want anything to do with it. Even the fact that I went and watched her experience, getting saved, I didn't want anything to do with that either. I mean, a lot of it is all just out there. It's a lot of spiritual stuff. And I didn't want any part of it at all. And I just thought those problems are her problems. Those are not my problems. And I didn't want anything to do with it. So, for the next 20 years, I was raising my family and I was just trying to ignore it and get away from it. I didn't ever seek it out. I didn't want anything to do with it because I saw firsthand, how intense it could really be. And I just was concentrating on raising my kids and having a career. So I embarked on a 20-year financial career, and I did very well in my career. And I got bored after a while, and I topped out at that career. I was taking it as far as I wanted to take it. I felt like the older I got, I really wanted to speak with people on a one-to-one and make a difference in their lives. And maybe my testimony could tell somebody or help somebody in some way that could help them, because I got through this. Well, I'd like to say I'm fully through this, but it never ends. So
Yeah.
everywhere I look, though, in that 20-year period, there were people around me that had all kinds of experiences.
Mm.
I had discovered in my early 20s that I had become empathic. So I had extra sensitive ability to see what was going on before something actually happened.
Mm.
And I especially honed my skills early on with people. And there was a incident where there was a guy that had raped a girl, and he was running down a street, and I was walking on the opposite side of the street. And it was my first experience at knowing what was wrong with this person before I was told. And a cop car had come up alongside me, and the other guy was running, hiding. And instantly I knew he raped someone. And I don't know how I knew that, but I did. And the police pulled up beside me and asked me where he was. And I pointed him out. And I said, what did he do? And he said, oh, he raped somebody. So right there, I knew I could have some skills. And then I started, I'd shake hands with somebody and I could sense something, attachment, you could say. And I didn't really understand it. I didn't really want anything to do with that. And I sort of just ignored it and I just put it on the back burner. And I had just been going through my life. But when my son was about 7 or 8, he had an experience that really confused me. I had been working all day, and I came home and I was making dinner, and he went outside to play with a couple of friends of his. And he had said that he was just going to be back by dinner, and I knew the neighbors and everything was fine. But he went missing for a while, and I was really panicking, like, where was my son? And so he comes rolling in at the point where I'm ready to call the police for a missing person on him. I thought someone had abducted him. And he rolls in and says, hey, mom. And I'm like, where have you been? And he's in a confused, dazed sort of state. And he says, well, I don't know where I was. And I pressured him for that story early on because I knew when he got older, he'd forget the details. So I had asked him very intently, where were you? And he said, I don't know. And he gave me this story. He goes, I think I saw this dead horse that hit a tree in this, because we had this little forested area behind our house. It wasn't heavily forested. There was a mall by it. There was a main roadway on the other side. There were apartment complexes by a shopping mall. So it was decorative, if anything. And he said this young horse had hit a tree and passed out, and that he must have passed out from the stench of the dead horse. And of course, that was the most ridiculous story I ever heard of. And I thought, well, maybe it's a screen memory. Maybe something happened and that was just some screen memory. Maybe he made it up. But I do know that he was gone for quite a while. And he didn't, and to this day, he can't tell me where he was at. And so I just sort of ignored that part. I was like, oh, okay, whatever. I still have to get on with life. And and then I had an incident with my daughter. And one day when she goes to bed, she is in a certain position, the typical head at the headboard. She had her pajamas on. And I go in to check on her, and it's about 5 a.m. or 6. And I'm really concerned. For some reason, I'm concerned. And I go in to check on her, and her whole body was placed on the bed. Her head was at the feet, and her feet was at the head. And her pajamas were not the ones she went to bed in, and they were backwards and inside out. And it was very bizarre. And I've always felt like my daughter had a connection in that arena. She is spiritually connected. She was drawn to horoscopes when she was very young, and she had an attraction to Egypt, and she was looking for books. She was very young, 6, 7, 8 years old, and looking for books at her school that had anything to do with Egypt, and dressing up on Halloween as an Egyptian princess. And she was, and she's gorgeous. I mean, she could pass, for that. And if there was past lives, if that really is true, I believe that that's where she came from. But who knows? The Bible says you only live once and then you die for judgment. So I don't have any answers. But I know that I just ignored it and I moved on. And I met a person that was a new relationship to me, and we had been together for 10 years. And in the beginning, though, there were some off and on strange events. There was a time where I was living over there, and this was in Bremerton. And in Bremerton, they have a sub-base Banger submarines, and it's a very closed military type secure facility. And he worked in that facility. And I was visiting before I moved over there. I was visiting, and I went on the ferry to go over the water, and my kids were with their dad that weekend. And I had seen on the ferry this strange orange light. And so to back this up a little, he had told me, you can't have fires on the beach. This is on the beach, and you can't have fires on the beach. And I was really upset then. I wanted to have a fire on the beach. And he said, you can't do that. It's a public beach. You can't do that. And so when I was on the ferry going over, I seen this orange light hovering near the sand on the beach. And I thought, well, that's not fair. I mean, I see somebody having a fire. So I was really intent looking at this fire. And then I started to look at the people around me, and everybody on the ferry was frozen except the car in front of me. And the car in front of me, the wife was in the driver's seat and her husband or whatever was in the passenger seat. And the two of them were looking at the same thing I was looking at. But everybody else was staring straight ahead and not moving. It was very bizarre. And so I watched this light rise up from the beach and come out over the water. And it was only then that I recognized there was a reflection on the water, like an orange reflection, and this was an orange ball. And something inside of me told me, oh, the orange ones are really, really bad. And I don't know how I knew that, but I just knew the orange ones are really bad. And I decided that I would try to break my gaze away from it and ignore it and put it out of my mind. But I couldn't. I mean, I was looking at the couple and they were looking at it. So I followed the gaze, and it came out across the water. And then I don't remember seeing it anymore. And we docked. So we went up around off the ferry, went up this road where all the traffic was leaving. And I seen something in the sky that looked unusual. So I pulled my car over, and it was a huge, huge floating triangle ship that was just above the tree line. I'm sure you've heard 1,000 stories about how it was silent. It was so large, it felt like I thought it was going to drop right there. It was very silent, but I saw enough detail where I could see circuitry underneath the bottom, and I could see lights that were inlaid like up inside of it a little bit, like a cone. So, it was just cruising over very, very slow. And I finally made it to my destination. And he says, where have you been? And I was like, I took the same ferry I always take. I don't know what you're talking about. And he says, are you 2 hours late? And I thought, uh-oh, and I couldn't wrap my mind around it. No, I wasn't late. You're confused. You don't understand. I was busy. It's same ferry. He's like, no, you're really, and 10 years of going across the ferry, this was the one time that I was missing supposedly. And I still
Hmm.
ignored it. So the next day, um, his house was on a plateau, so you could see the city. And I remember getting up the next morning, opening these big bay window curtains and seeing this black round UFO just sitting above the city, hovering. And it stayed there for 3 days. And I couldn't understand why the military wasn't coming to take it down because the sub base Banger was right there. And so it made me think, well, maybe it's military. So a friend of his came over and he also said, hey, did you guys see that UFO? It's hanging over the city. And yeah, we all saw it. I looked at the news. There was nothing on the news. There was nothing, no one intercepted it. So I thought, oh, well, maybe this is a military craft impersonating UFOs. Because what else could it be? And why would the military be so close by with the security so high? And yet there's these objects floating over. There was the orange ball and the triangle and the black round ship all in one weekend.
Hmm.
And yet no one ever said a word. So I didn't know what to think about it. I left it behind. I just ignored it. But things in my life had started escalating, and I um I didn't know what I could do to protect myself. So I ran to God because I didn't know what else to do. And that was much later in my life, when I decided I'm going to like really get some help. I need to find out what is happening and why is this following me around, or it seemed like it was following me around, but it was always working through other people. And
Hmm.
so I decided that I was going to document some of these things that were happening to me because it wasn't just to write a book to sell a book. I mean, I don't need to sell a book just because, and I'm not doing any shameless plugs or anything. I wrote it as a documentary for my children because I know that one day they're going to be searching out what had happened to them in their childhood. And they may have more stories later that'll come out that they don't even recognize right now. Both my kids want nothing to do with it. And I don't blame them because when I was that age too, I wanted nothing to do with it. And back when I was growing up, you were an outcast if you talked about anything like this. But in my home, it was quite open. And everybody talked about it like it was no big deal, except for me and my siblings, which were fearful. So I kind of
Yeah.
like tried my best to I didn't talk about it. I didn't even read any of those books about it. But I was still really drawn to it. Spiritually, I was drawn to it up for answers. I needed answers. And so in 1997, I came across a show, and this show has now been banned and you will never find this show in the entire US or even the world. And it's a show on UPN back in the 1997, I believe it was. And it was today on the internet, it's called the Lakeside Incident, where a family was abducted by something and they had made a show out of a show. So the original show was the original show I saw, and the whole family went missing in the Midwest, and the whole family went missing, and they didn't know where these people were. So they put it on TV as to, hey, have you seen these people? As help us out. They're missing. The whole family's missing. And they said we have a video camera that was left behind, and um, the video camera was given to a teenage boy in the family as a Christmas gift. So on the online version, it's Thanksgiving, but it wasn't that. It was a Christmas gift at Christmas. So he had opened up this gift and he was really excited. He wanted a camcorder and he was running around camcording everybody, just really stupid things. His mom making dinner and everything. They came together as a family and a light went out, or their circuit breaker was um, like the circuit breaker. Oh, you got to cut this part. The circuit breaker exploded and they had no lights, they had no electricity. So the father and the son went out to go look, find out what was causing it. And in the original, the circuit breaker was melted. And they went back a little further and decided, hey, I don't know what's going on here. but we really need to get further out into the property. And they had seen a light from a far off distance, and they went over through some woods and over a hill, and they were trying to hide. And there was these two alien creatures, and they were doing a cattle mutilation, and they had a laser, and they were caught. And so obviously the dad and the son were just freaked out. There was there was some quiet activity happening until one of the aliens turned around and looked at him, and that was it. They were done. So they ran for the house when they told everybody, lock the house, come inside the house. And they stayed in that house and shut the curtains and the doors, and they were screaming that, and the dad was telling them, hey, I saw something down there. Well, the orbs started coming. There was creatures started coming in the house. A red light, an orb came through the house and into a upstairs closet door, and they had slammed the closet door thinking they could trap it there. And after about 20 minutes, the house was sheer chaos. This was no production. This way you could sense it was real. And they go back in the closet later and they see this dead alien creature there. And they really slammed the door. And at the end of the film, they had went back and it was gone, completely gone. And I mean, there was no trace of anything in that closet. But one of the memories that really stuck out with me was looking at a shotgun, which was bent backwards on their patio. He had tried to go and use a weapon, and they had bent the weapon backwards and disabled the car. So the engine was disabled, and they weren't able to leave. So they were being tormented. And it was just chaos watching this. And the kid with the camera, he was the last man standing, and he was in the bathroom, and I had seen the camera was like part of his face, and it was sheer terror, and it caught part of a gray that had come into the bathroom to grab him. And I remembered a scene I saw just earlier before that scene about three grays that had come down together from a little wooded area, and they were like floating, and they formed like two in the back and one in the front, like a triangle. And they'd come out from behind a tree and they floated down, and that's when the whole family lost it. And they took that show off the air because it was real. It was very authentic. And I have spent years and years trying to research that film. I wanted to see that original film again. I know someone must have a copy of it, but it was at that moment that I was filled with terror down into my soul because I knew I had experienced something, but I wasn't sure what. And I didn't want to see that, that's for sure. And my kids had come out of the room at the time, and I'm like, go back in the room. This is scary. So I tried to shield them from it. I tried to protect them. And in the meantime, I am doing, spiritual warfare on the side, searching for answers and asking God, why is this happening? Like, why is it happening to me? I'm a believer, and I wore that label. But when you see other people that are experiencing the same things you are, how can I explain it when I can't explain it for myself? I mean, I didn't know how to help someone else. I didn't know how to help myself. And then in 1999, I had my first abduction that I can semi recall. This was a very bizarre situation. I often worked two jobs, and this was the second job I had as a promotional spokesmodel at a place in Seattle. And I had a friend come and pick me up, and the promotions are usually 10 to 12. So I was off at midnight, and I had a babysitter at my house for my kids. And I left the promotion, and I was just thinking in my mind, I was sitting in the passenger seat. I was just thinking, I really want to get out of my work clothes and get into something comfortable. And that's it, lights out. I don't remember anything. And then the next memory I had is I was sitting straight up, and I was in different clothes. I don't remember all changing in different clothes. And I remember seeing my friend in the driver's seat, and he was like a zombie, and I was a zombie. And I'm looking around, and it's like in the back alley, and it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, there's nobody here. Like, lights were off of every facility. There are no cars anywhere. And I'm really feeling dazed and kind of out of it. And I said, hey, I really need to check on my kids. That was the predominant thought. I really got to get to my kids. I just see what's happening. I just felt I got a call. And so normally on a promotion, I would go 10 to 12, and then I would go home, and nothing would happen. I didn't party afterwards. I didn't do anything like that. I was very responsible. And I called my babysitter. Well, to back that up, there was some cell phones in our car. I had my personal cell phone. He had his personal cell phone, and then he had a work phone. And I'm sitting in the car going, I need to find a payphone. I have to find a payphone right away so I can call. And here we are scrounging for change, and there are three cell phones sitting right on our laps. And it's like, how in the world did that happen? And so I'm looking for change, and I'm thinking in my mind, where am I going to find a phone booth? Like, there is no more phone booths anywhere. I'm never going to find a phone booth. And so we come out an alley, and right around the corner, there was a phone booth. And so I put the money in, and I'm calling my babysitter, and I knew something strange happened, but I said, "Hey, I'm on my way." And she's like, "Where have you been?" I was like, "What are you talking about?" And she says, "Oh, um, my dad is very upset, and he's wondering where you're at, and he's on his way to come and get me, and I have to leave." And I was like, "What time is it?" And she goes, "It's 2 o'clock." I said, "No, no, no. I just got off of work. I'm on my way. I just called to tell you I'm on my way." No, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. And I started to remember on that phone call how dark it was where I came from just a minute ago. There was no lights anywhere, no cars anywhere. And I thought, this is really strange. And so I remember on the drive home, it was about 20 minutes outside of Seattle. On that 20-minute drive, I'm just looking at him, and he's a zombie, both hands on the wheel, 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, looking straight forward and not saying a word. And I felt like there was a layer put on over my consciousness. Like, I was programmed that you have to go to bed, and you're tired, and you'll feel better when you wake up, but just go to bed, just go to bed. And I felt like that's not how it works. When everybody knows you get off work, you need a little bit of wind down time. But I felt excessively tired, and I had that layer over me. So I decided, okay, I went to bed, and I went to sleep right away. And in the morning, I still had that memory. I remember, I made a conscious effort to remember every detail in the morning as much as I possibly could. And I called up, my friend, and I was like, "Well, do you know what happened to us last night?" "No." "Do you remember anything?" "No." I said, "Do you remember driving straight ahead looking for a payphone when you had two cell phones?" He goes, "No, I don't remember that." He had no recollection of taking me to a payphone even after. So it was obvious he was still under some sort of trance or anesthesia or whatever it was. It was
Weird.
very, very scary.
Yeah.
And so the next day I called up my church, and I said, "I need help. You're the only people I know that could tell me what's going on." And they were not able to help me. They did not know what to say. They were not involved in anything like that. And the typical believers in this country, they don't talk about that. If you call yourself a Christian, we don't talk about that, and they're of the devil. But I had seen like a lot of varied type of things, mostly negative, and I had my own experiences. And so that abduction like really stuck in my mind. And after that, I had become obsessed with wanting to know what happened to me. And I needed to know. And along the lines of this, in my childhood, I was also very interested in photography. And I loved photography, but I was bored with the subjects. All the subjects that everyone takes pictures of, I just felt like I just wanted something more. So, for quite a few years, I put it aside, but I started bringing out my camera, and I started taking pictures, started seeing things around me, and I did not want to see them really. I didn't want to be involved in any of this, but I had a calling on my life, and I knew that, that God wanted me to do warfare, spiritual warfare. So it's a little convoluted in the fact that it was mixed with religion and mixed with sightings and abductions and paranormal experiences. And it was just the world I lived in that was more the norm than the world I actually lived in. And
Mm.
so that was the world I did a lot of my, of observations and investigations, and I studied quite a bit. And then and in 1999, that was that experience. And then a few years later, we moved into a house. My kids and I moved into a house that was a haunted house. And on the outside, it didn't look that way. It was in a suburb of Seattle. It was a very beautiful house. It was in a cul-de-sac with a lot of other nice houses, but the house wasn't brand new. It was a few years old. It was, probably built in like the late, you know, late 80s probably. And when my realtor and I walked through the house, I noticed there was these crosses all over the walls everywhere and an open Bible in a few of the rooms. I thought that's a little excessive. What is she trying to say? And I didn't know what to think, but I got a kind of a bad vibe about it. And we moved into the house anyway because it was close to my kids' school and it was in close to my job. So we moved into it anyway, and I just sort of put it aside. And shortly after that, things started kicking up, probably within about 6 months or so. And
Wait, Dakota, let me interrupt you right here for a second. Before we get to the exciting stories from the haunted house, let me ask you a few other questions before it slips too far backwards. I'm sorry. Sorry to interrupt you. First of all, when we started our talk, you talked about the scoop mark that you found on your calf, right?
yeah, my left calf, yes, lower left calf. Yeah.
Is it still there?
No, it disappeared right away.
Oh,
It disappeared right away. Like I noticed it in the morning. I was sitting out in the back porch, and a few hours later, it was gone.
okay, okay. That's interesting because yesterday we had a podcast with Melanie Aguirre. I hope I get that right this time. And she also discovered a scoop mark, but on her head. It was
Oh,
there.
wow.
It was suddenly there somehow. I didn't ask her if it disappeared. Dustin, do you remember? I don't know.
Yeah, I can't remember if she said it disappeared or not.
Yeah, that's
But
interesting.
yeah, it's when she started getting these contacts, she started noticing the marks on her body and stuff
Yeah,
like that.
the same context,
Um,
right? That's interesting. And another thing you were talking about was like was it some kind of animal hanging from a tree or inside of a tree?
A cow was dropped on a treetop.
Yeah,
oh.
also very interesting. We have a researcher here in Germany, one of the few German researchers on that topic here in Germany, Joseph Zehne, and he just released a video with pictures of animals hanging from power poles or standing on rooftops, like a cow on a rooftop, or yeah, like some kind of, I don't know, sheep, and it was tangled in the wires from the power pole and was hanging from the
Mhm.
from the pole. And I said, what the fuck is going on? How did it get there? It's crazy. And he also told me stories about how cattle were mutilated or abducted and brought back with not a single drop of blood in their bodies and stuff like that. This is
Mhm.
very, very interesting. Very interesting. You
Yeah,
also,
and the fact that you said too that your family was having sightings too in during the earlier times of you having these experiences and sightings and stuff like that. So that's pretty cool.
Well, I like to say I was born into this, and
Yeah.
I hear a lot of guests talking about one day they discovered it, or then one day something happened and they were curious. I was always in it, like from day one.
yeah,
It was always spiritual, something or other.
yeah. And you told us that you think or you know that your family is kind of cursed.
Yes.
Mm.
So tell us more, please. How does it show? I mean, you told us a few things, but what else?
There was a lot of financial poverty in my family and mental illness and very openness as far as inviting experiences into your life. And my mom was an open door, so to speak. So I learned a lot of this through her. And
Mm.
my curiosity was piqued because it was out of the norm. And her curiosities sort of became mine until it got too scary for me. And then I left. I didn't have anything to do with it. And so we were cursed as far as incidents happening to us on a regular basis, demonic incidents, as well as alien experiences, financial poverty. And my mom had some emotional issues and mental issues. She had some PTSD of some incidents that happened to her in childhood that she really could never really wrap her mind around. And so her whole being, her entire everything was all about research and knowing more. And I really love that curiosity. My dad is electrical engineer, so he's a brilliant man, but he stayed away from this topic and he believed my mother, but it was mixed in with a religious concept of all of this is bad. And yet it was being brought in the house all the time. And there was a lot of chaos. The Ouija board itself, we found out later, was in the attic, which, if anybody knows about how it can cause real chaos, it was tearing our whole family apart. It was causing fights and dissension and a lot of anger and hostilities and infighting, a lot of infighting and a lot of division. And it was just craziness. And I know that she did the best she could to handle what she was handling. But I come from a logical background. I don't deal in like emotional outburst or upset, or I needed to calm her, and I always tried to help her and calm her. And it was a little easier to talk to her at before she passed away at the end of her life. She had had a few experiences, but that kind of family environment is not unique to me. I mean, there are other types of situations involved. There was that story in Indiana about the haunted house and the portal, where a family lived in it, and the mother with the two kids had experienced some demonic stuff. The kids were becoming possessed, and her son was crawling up a wall. And in fact, that same situation happened to a neighbor of mine, a friend of mine, back when I was raising my kids. My son was friends with someone who was a boy that had become possessed, and his mother was telling me that because she spent a great deal of time trying to help him get better. And he was crawling up the wall, crawled up her wall up to the ceiling, and fell on her bed.
Ooh, freaky.
And yeah, I tried to keep my son away from them after that. I was like, no, I don't want that around me. And just the fact of the affiliation with them, I had heard scratch marks on my walls, and my kids were seeing wizards in the closet. The clothes would shape to be a wizard hat and a wizard. And every night I would say goodnight and pray with them good night. And they say, shut the closet door, shut the closet door. And I never understood. Then they told me that they were seeing things. And I thought, oh, kids and their imaginations. I'm sure it's true, but I prayed over it, let it go. And then there were scratch marks. It just got escalated. And so the woman who was the neighbor, she was a friend of mine that she worked at a large corporation, and she was upset her son was acting the way that he was acting. And I tried to keep my son away from him, but just the fact there was so much going on, I asked her to come in, and she was, rebuking demons, but she would go straight to the closets, and she saw in the closet, this is what she would say: oh, I see you in the closet hiding, and so she rebuked it, made him leave, and I didn't have any problems after that. And I really do think there's an assault on our children. I think they come through nightmares and visitations in their rooms. And there's a million stories of parents who try to protect their kids from abductions, and they're paralyzed and they can't do anything. And there's nothing you can do except by the power of God is to protect yourself. And I tried the very best I could, but I became more like wise, and I asked for wisdom. I wanted to know what I was up against and what I'm dealing with. And so it was a very crazy time. And I think that other families have similar situations, or even maybe no visitations, but domestic violence and chaos and the craziness. So our family, never was really the normal family, so to speak.
Sure.
And these incidences brought me where I'm at.
Since you talked about the Ouija board, me personally, I do not believe in the power of the Ouija board. I tried it multiple times, nothing happened, and I was open for it. So I really tried, but I can imagine that if you use the Ouija board and something happens to you, you yourself are some kind of portal. Maybe you're a special kind of person. If something happens to you, there are people who tried it many times and nothing happened, just like myself. But yeah, like I said, I do not believe in the power of the Ouija board, but I can imagine to some people.
Yeah, especially if you have a curse on your family, I'm pretty sure something will come through that board. Emily Rose type shit.
My mom didn't know how to close out a board. So they say if you're going to use the board, you have to close it out properly. And I'm quite convinced she did not even know that part. And so it wreaked havoc. I'm not saying that the Ouija board in itself was what caused this, but she was an open conduit, not only through the board, but also through the books that she read, the movies that she watched. You know, I mean, I was like 8 years old, 9 years old, watching The Exorcist with her. And, you know, she just was very open and read every kind of book out there that you could think of. But I was drawn to her Bigfoot books and the UFOs. She was especially, you know, obsessed with the UFOs. And so that's what made me think that she was abducted. And she was reading Eric von Daniken's Chariots of the Gods. And that was the first book I ever read because she loaned it to me. And it was a really good book. And so
Hell yeah, it is.
it
It's
was
one of my
really good.
favorites.
Yeah. And I really was interested in that. And I know there's a lot more out there than what we just see with our eyes. And so, anyway, should I get into the
Yeah,
house I moved to?
please. Sorry
Yeah.
for interrupting, but
Yeah, if you want to tell us more about the books that you have written.
oh wait, Dustin,
Oh, sure.
we cut her off with her story about the haunted house, maybe.
Oh, yes, I'm sorry.
What story?
I'm sorry. We talked about the haunted house. Maybe let's start there. You interrupted her.
All right, let's talk about the haunted house. When I moved into this house, like I said, there were crosses all over the walls and there was Bibles open, and we went and bought the house anyway. And soon after, we started having some like black shadow people running through our kitchen out the back patio. And my son saw it first, and then I saw it. And in fact, that was the first thing I ever saw. And then I started seeing UFOs going above the house or over the house. I'd seen a triangle ship, and I had also seen a round blue ball. And the blue ball was like actually hovering, like watching the house. It was right above our neighborhood. I felt like it was like watching me. I don't know, but you know, I took pictures of those. I have yet to publish. I have over 3,000 photographs. So I have yet to publish those photographs. They're coming. And so anyway, there's quite a bit of photographs. And I started photographing. I photographed the UFO that was the triangle and the UFO that was the ball. And I started sending it into a website called UFOs Northwest. And they started taking my stories, and I started providing pictures and incidents that happened. And they did their own investigations and found out that I was legitimate. I wasn't photoshopping anything or anything like that. And so anyway, this house we moved in was a little bit haunted, and it had some spirit in the house, and I couldn't put my finger on it. But one day my dog was down in our garage and was growling at something in our garage, and it was at the ceiling corner, and he would walk along to the other corner staring at that and growling and barking and growling and barking. And this was about 1 o'clock in the morning. My dad just passed away, and I inherited, you know, all his albums he had, and I was organizing his books and albums and in my garage and setting up shelving, and the dog went nuts. And I thought, okay, well, maybe my dad, who was not, even though as brilliant as he wasn't the nicest person. And I thought maybe he's attached to these objects. He was very attached to his books and records in life. And I thought, well, maybe he has a spirit that's attached to this or something. And then later, my daughter was with a friend, and we had a rec room, and it had a wall, and on the other side of the wall was the kitchen. And she was home alone with her friend. There was nobody at the house. And she had heard a woman and a man talking on the other side of the wall on the kitchen side. And it was clear enough where they both jumped out, freaked out, ran around the whole house thinking someone was in the house, and there was no one there. And later in my life, I'd actually heard the same thing, but not in that house. But in that house, that's what she had. Then we had orbs, large white orbs, coming through our downstairs rec room into our window, and it would go up. My daughter's room was just off the rec room area, and it went up the stairs. And I watched this orb come in, and it went up the stairs right past me, and my dog started chasing it right up to her room and out her bedroom window. And, you know, the dog was always looking at orbs out the windows. There was one particular window in our rec room that it seemed to like to come through quite a bit, and the dog would always bark there. And our dog was I had an Akita Shepherd, dog is very, very mellow and laid back. So for the dog to bark like that, it was very unusual, very, very unusual.
Hmm.
And then we found like a bouquet of roses buried out in the backyard, and we found just notes, and it was just strange, strange house. And I know now that the crosses on the walls and the Bibles, because she was experiencing those same type of things. I'm sure of that. And so we moved out of that house. It was scary.
Yeah.
And and I had another incident I moved for the time I told you in Bremerton, and my friend's dog had disappeared out of the kennel, and the kennel was locked. And I don't know how the dog got out of the kennel. No one knows how the dog got out of the kennel. He had a padlock on it with a key. So we had seen some strange lights in the sky. And that was the same area where we saw the triangle and the black UFO round ship in the sky for 3 days, and the orange ball. It was in that time frame that the dog disappeared. And this dog was a very beloved dog and sweet dog, and he was just gone.
Hmm.
And we don't know what happened to him. We never saw anything. I also had a cat missing out of that haunted house too, a cat missing, and didn't want to be in that house and ran off. And then later I was kind of walking on the perimeter, and I had found a white cat, a half of a white cat that was degutted out, and it had like pink on the inside of it, and it was the top half of the cat, like it was lasered right in half. And I never found the bottom half of it, but I saw the top half of the cat, and it had like, you could see the rib cage, and it was pink on the inside. And it was like everything was gone from it. And it was a shock. It fried my mind. It fried my mind. I just sort of tossed it into, we had a local, like a creek, and I just sort of tossed it down the creek. I didn't know what to do with it. It was very, very, very scary. And
Yeah.
so I didn't want anything to do with that. And eventually we had to move out of that house. It was that house, it was like a house. I
Oh
tore
man.
apart too. It was a crazy time. Um, it was very crazy. And then my husband and I, we took a trip down across the country when the pandemic first started, and we were just housebound for a year, and we had to get out, and so we decided to drive to Myrtle Beach from Seattle, and that was quite a drive. And then we were seeing things that were bizarre as we were entering a few states. I would have to say Arizona, California were the two top states. And we passed through Texas. There were some sightings there. In Texas, we came across the largest cross in the Northern Hemisphere. And that cross is really huge. And I didn't think anything of it. I took a picture. I took 1,000 pictures of our trip, and I looked back later, and I had seen an entity sitting on one of the arms of the crosses. And that is on my blog, on my webpage. You can see it. And it had like a streak going from the ground up. And I'm assuming it was an angel sitting on the cross, maybe just showing me that I'm protected as I go. And I didn't really think too much of it. Then we were in California, and California had a really bizarre lighting situation. We were staying at hotels, and I'd seen this light on the horizon. It was like low, there was a grassy area, and it was just beyond that. And these lights would come up and down and go up and down, and they go along the grass and along. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. I took a couple pictures. They didn't turn out that great, but I did take some pictures and have that. And then we decided to leave that area. And it wasn't too long. Like the next night, we were still in California. The next night, there was an object. Oh, this is so bizarre. Okay, we were on a freeway. There was a freeway going like one direction, another freeway the other. And I'm seeing this car. There was like 3 lanes, and I'm seeing this car ahead of me to the left, and he's braking it. And there's no other cars ahead of him. And I'm thinking, why is he braking it? And, drivers, and then I was braking it too. We were braking it because the object had come down from the right side of the sky in a sort of a like half moon shape, but it was full, like it was all full. It was like a cradle, like it was some cradling thing with a white object in it, had some
Hmm.
semblance of a shape. And it had come across the freeway, and it had landed in this grassy area that was between the two major freeways. And light had changed color to iridescent green. And I was telling my husband, what is that? What is that? Like, look at that green light, you know, it's landing. And you could see, I took several pictures, and it's really strange to see something like that. And it's within a few feet of your car, and there's nothing you can do but drive right past it. I mean, there was a lot of cars after me. We couldn't just stop, but we took some pictures. It was very bizarre. And then, you know, we got into Arizona, and Arizona is well known for all kinds of UFOs and abductions and paranormal stuff. Very, very typical of Arizona. And we were in a city passing this really bland area outside the Mojave Desert, in a city called Vicksburg. And Vicksburg is not, there's like nothing there. But I was bored, and I'm looking out the window because I'm thinking, okay, there's these hills and these mountains, and they look so bland, but I bet you there's something attached to these in somewhere or another. So I came across these hills, and the first hill I came across had a really large hole in the side of the mountain or hill. It's like a mini mountain, but it was a large hole enough for UFOs to go in and out of. And I looked at that. I didn't have my camera ready. I regretted that. So I grabbed my camera in case I saw something again, and I did. I saw the next hill had also another round UFO hole, this black hole, really large. And I was so surprised that the government didn't cover that up, or it wasn't disguised. But people going down that highway, especially when you're going through the desert, they just want to get to their destination. So they don't take the time to look at everything on the sides when there is nothing to look at. So I'm taking pictures. I got a picture of it. And unbeknownst to me, after I looked at the picture, there were two aliens, grays, standing in the field between our car and this hill where the hole was. And I immediately knew they were guarding it. I mean, I knew it. I just knew. But I had a sense that they knew that I was thinking about this. I had come into some sort of consciousness where I knew that this was not right. And I was alerted. And I believe they became alerted, and they came out. But I already got a photo before they were able to stop me or anything that happened. And then I got another photo just down the road from that. And that hill had a crystal ball on the top of this big mountain. A crystal ball that was, from my direction, it looked like the size of a car coming from where I was sitting. But I know that you get up to the crystal ball, it's going to be hundreds of feet in the air. It's just enormous. And looked like there was like some sort of a structure up there. I don't know if it was a house or if it was a facility. I don't know what it was. And a UFO that was on the left side of this crystal ball. It was landed by there. And I was really stunned. I had never seen anything like that. I never expected a large crystal ball to be so open out there. And I became very interested in photography at that point, for sure. And then I really became serious about taking these pictures because no one will believe me. I mean, there was no way I could present any evidence without any kind of photos first. I needed to have the evidence. I mean, in today's times, you have to have videos or pictures, or, you know, it's not just enough to say, oh, I saw a light in the sky anymore. So I was ready to document it.
So was this an inspiration for your books? Then that
Correct.
you're finally getting so much evidence for yourself that you want to share it with the world and stuff.
Well, I'm overwhelmed, honestly. It happens a lot with a lot of people all around me on a daily basis. And so I'm
Sure.
overwhelmed. But I decided, you know, I better document this because what does it look like for a believer to go through something like this? You know,
Yeah.
when you meet people that have the same experiences, what are you supposed to do? Are
Mhm.
you supposed to run away and say, "Oh, I can't deal with that"? You know, as a Christian, you're taught, "Oh, they're all of the devil and they're evil." But I don't. I've had some experiences, and I don't believe that they're all evil entities, because look around you and you can see all the creative things in the world, the difference of the trees. And in fact, the trees in Washington State, we have the most species of trees in the entire world in our
Mhm.
state alone. And you know, we got different varieties of people and different varieties of languages and colors and animals. And so it's very reasonable to me that he would create other worlds. And the Bible says he does create other mansions, and he has other worlds, and he has other beings. And I do believe there are good ones.
Yeah.
And the the Bible itself is a very supernatural book. There are nothing but miracles and supernatural all throughout it. Like, in Exodus alone, they had, the parting of the Red Sea, and they had a fire. They had talk about the fire at night, the pillar of fire that guided, people, and the cloud by day that guided them, which a lot of people interpret today to be UFOs or UFOs in
Mhm.
clouds, which is what I am studying right now. That's my expertise right now. I'm really into studying what's hiding behind the clouds. And these books were meant for my kids, but if anybody can get help from
Sure.
them, great.
Sure. So where can some of these people find your books on Amazon or off your website? Can they can if you want to
Yeah,
if you want to share your titles of your books right now to plug them in, and if there's a website that you want to share with everybody, they can reach out to you.
but I have that one last story. You
Oh,
want the one
please
story?
share. Yeah, let's hear this other
I
story.
do. I do have 3 books right now. I'll continue to write them as I experience things. My first 2 books, on Holy Alliances, was written in 2011, which was more of the experiences of my background and where I came from and what happened. And that book also talks about experiences that I had with my mother later in life. And we went to Yakima because that's where she moved to when my dad passed away. And those those books are all about the experiences that I started documenting. And if if anyone can understand, they can understand, that it's a very dangerous field to come up against to spiritual things, because you don't always know what you're dealing with. You don't know what kind of entities. So I just give it a general name of entities, since we don't really know. But I know how I feel. And I know if there's an angel's in my presence, I know how I feel about that. And if something demonic's in my presence, I feel negative energy. And so anyway, um, my most recent book, let's go with my second book. My second book was written about an incident with a friend of mine that we had been dating, and I was helping him get free of some possession. I don't know if possession is the right word, but he had some entities that were attached to him. We went to the church, we tried to get help, and we didn't find help from anybody. No one would help us. And I finally met up with an older lady that was a friend of mine from my church from many, many, many years ago, that we became friends. I went to her for help. And I also studied under a woman named Margaret, who was based out of Africa. She was teaching me spiritual warfare things and what happens with the demonic realm. So I went to this lady. Um, she wants to be called only by her first name, Lou. And Lou was my saving grace in all of this. I was able to keep my head focused and straight. And I was trying to help my friend get free of these entities. And in turn, they lashed out at me. And I was being choked and thrown out of bed. And I was having furniture shaking. And it was very traumatic, very traumatic. And it took me a long time to write that book. Right now, it's not available because I pulled it down off of Amazon. I needed to make a couple corrections to it. My first book as well. But this third book that I have, it really was the clincher for me as far as really what's happening out there. I think I've gotten closer to the answer than I ever have before in my life. So when I did my transition out of financial, I went into caregiving, I went into in-home healthcare. I really had a heart for people, and I was tired of looking at the walls. And so I decided if I went into caregiving, I can actually do some good with some people and make a difference in their lives on a one-to-one basis. And I met a lady who was based out of, let's say, high up in the Cascades in mountain region, is very isolated. And I was working for her, with her, and she is disabled. She has MS. And so from the neck down, she didn't have any feeling or anything. And so I was one of several aides that took care of her around the clock. And I had a day shift. I never wanted to work at night, although I did work at night sometimes. It was really scary to be out there. She has a ranch that is very remote, not a lot of people around. And she had lived in this home of hers for many, many, many years, like 45 years or more. And one day her husband went missing, and we didn't know what happened. And she was telling me the story that this was before I met her. She told me what happened to him and didn't know where he went or anything. And so I decided that I felt sorry for this lady. I was going to take care of her and help her. So my first experience in the house was at night. She had a CPAP machine. This CPAP machine, like my first night there, the CPAP machine turned on when I was supposed to turn it on. It just turned on by itself. And I was still adjusting for hoses, and I was still trying to help her get her breathing right. And the machine turned on. And I was obviously startled. And she looked at me and she said, "Oh, that's my husband. Don't worry about it. He turns my machine on for me off and on every night." And I was like a little alarmed. And I thought, okay. So I didn't know how to wrap my mind around that. And I had to adjust to that. And then some more experience started happening. We started seeing, like, people were seeing Bigfoot on the property. And in fact, there was a Bigfoot den that was like located only 50 feet from the house. And this Bigfoot, according to her, we'll call her Source because she's the title of the book, Source X. And she had said for many years there was a Bigfoot that resided somewhere now that around the house. But of course, she had MS and couldn't get out. So I went out and I looked and I saw a den out there. He had been sitting, he had carved out for himself a back wall out of trees and an area where it was sitting. And there was also a soccer ball of theirs that they had lost. It had been taken in there, but also a crowbar. The crowbar was under there. I thought, oh, well, how'd the crowbar get in here? And it wasn't mad at one time? I didn't know what to think. I walked through, took some pictures of the area. I didn't really see anything. And you go further past this Bigfoot den, and there's a meadow. And in this meadow is where I saw all these different types of suns. So I posted on my website, on my social media accounts, these different versions of the sun. And a lot of people are saying that the sun isn't like the sun used to be years and years ago. And I was getting a little concerned because the sun, so-called sun, was dropping down over the deck. And I would be out on the back deck with Source having lunch. And one day, this light came down very, very low, and it looked like the sun. It was round and, it was bright and it was really intense, but I thought it's really unusual. So I took some pictures of it, and it had a shape. When you contrast it, it actually had a shape behind it. But the light was so bright and intense that nothing in my computer could like try to bring out an object or anything. It just wouldn't. It was completely whitewashed, blacked out, whatever. It wouldn't let me see anything. I just saw the edges of it. And eventually she had Source was abducted off their back deck with another aide. The two of them were abducted by the same light. And it seemed like when I was there wasn't any real abductions happening. But when I would come back to work on a certain day, she would tell me, "Oh, this other aide, something happened to us, and look at these pictures." So they took some pictures, and that same sun had come really down low. And the aide, well, to describe it, Source is in a wheelchair, and the aide was upright, and the aide went to sit and talk with her. But the next memory they had was the aide laying flat on the deck, and she was looking up, and she had her cell phone camera, and she had taken a picture of the top of Source's head, like in the chair, and it was glowing white. Like the light was so intense on her, it was glowing white. And it was obvious. And they had some missing time. I went and did a time check, investigated it, and they had like 10 minutes or so of missing time. And there's nothing, they have no recollection of it or anything. And then I saw the deceased go, she had a horse that had to be put down, and that ghost of the horse had appeared in the arena. And in this arena was a portal. And this portal would come up, and it would shoot out UFOs and different things. And it's just, there was this ghost one day of this horse. I took a picture of that, and it's on my website. And this area in particular was a portal. And I went out and took some readings of it, and the readings would spike, at certain areas. But it was just a general, like, I don't want to stay in this area. It makes me feel creeped out, and I don't want to go back there, because she had a big yard, and then she had a forest that surrounded it. And I had caught also a UFO shooting lasers. Like, I don't know if it was a game between these UFOs or what. There was a UFO on it was on the corner of a video I had, and it was shooting, it's like silver rays, like streaks and silver rays, and it was shooting it at these other little orbs, and they were running away from it like they were playing a game. And they'd come out of the woods, and the little orbs would come out, and then they'd go back in the woods, and this other one would shoot at it. And I haven't posted that one yet because I have to, I gotta like fix the video and taper it down. It's a little long. So anyway, there was a ton of experiences, and she had had herself touching in the middle of the night. She had heard noises. She had heard high-pitched noises coming from above her roof or on the side wall. And then one day I came to work, and she was like, I heard something on the side of the house. Can you just go check and see if there's anything weird out there? So my intention was to go take a picture of the backyard because that was kind of the area where her room was. And I was going to take a picture and just show her, oh, everything's fine. It was daylight, nothing happened. And it was in February, and it had snow on the ground. So it was pretty cold outside. And I was not even going to grab a jacket. I was just like, grab my cell phone. I was going to run out there. Midway, I was stopped dead in my tracks by a horse. And I had this distraction. I looked down and I see this little boot print. I mean, this boot print was probably like 4 inches, and it had the perfect round curvature on the toe part, and it had like a heel with a round. It was one print, no other prints, just a single print, and it was very small, and it bothered me. So I leaned down to take a picture, and that was lights out for me. I don't have any other recollection, but my next memory is that, oh, I have a ton of fear. I have a lot of fear, and I didn't know where this fear came from. It was excessive fear, and I was really terrified. I ran around to the back. I took a picture, and I ran right back in the house, and I said, oh, see, there's nothing. But when I went to show her, not only did the boot print disappear off my camera, but I also found out I'd taken 36 pictures of me being spun around in a vortex. And I did not see the vortex. I did not feel it. I didn't have any sense of, which is odd because I'm pretty empathic. So that was a real surprise. And I just had seen that I was taking my thumb was stuck on a trigger, and it was going around in circles. I was just taking pictures in circles, and it was very bizarre. And I felt fortunate that I wasn't taken into a vortex, but I know why I wasn't. I was not taken in because something was coming through to the other side. And these were the Navajo Indians call them like the ones that look like pants, skinwalkers. I think it's skinwalkers.
Mhm.
They have like I know the DMV in California has a statue of it right in front, but it was just basically nightcrawler. That's what I'm trying to think of. They were night crawlers. And I compared the pictures on my phone of the night crawlers coming through the vortex versus what I saw on the internet, and they were exactly the same. But this was a whole colony of them. And to my knowledge, I have not seen anywhere on the internet that has any more pictures of just one of them. I actually caught a whole colony, and they were coming through the vortex. And that was the reason why she was, a little weirded out. Something was happening, and she was empathic as well. And she had seen UFOs go over the property, and then her daughter uh, had a Bigfoot drawing, and the Bigfoot drawing showed a UFO hovering over their property with feet of the Bigfoot being sucked up into the Bigfoot, maybe into the UFO. There were a lot of stories coming out of there, and I experienced a lot of things out of there. And I started seeing aliens, and I started taking these pictures. So when I first started taking pictures of the aliens, I thought, oh, they're okay. They're not touching me. My first picture was of a green alien that had abducted her. I had some pictures that I had taken. I'd seen this alien on these photos that was given to me by this other aide that was abducted, and I saw the alien in the photo. So this was the alien that abducted her and was watching from around a corner of the house. And I looked at this green alien, and it had these spikes that were like kind of going up on its head, bony structure, and hollowed out like eye sockets. And it was scary to me, and I didn't like it.
And
And
it's on
I
video.
tried,
You captured it on video, and it's on your website, right?
the picture of it is on my website. It's correct.
Yeah.
And I started taking more pictures of aliens, and then I came across an alien that had these were some little black creatures that were very small. I would say probably 12 inches maybe, I don't know, 13 inches. They weren't very big at all, but I had never seen these with my naked eye. But I had gotten in the habit of taking a lot of pictures at this property to prove my point of everything that was happening. And I go down into this forested area, and I was just snapping pictures, and I felt a little strange, and I heard a voice in my head that said, "State your intent." So I said out loud, "I'm just here to take pictures. I'm not here to harm anything. I just want to take pictures." And I was just snapping pictures, and I came across a photo of a UFO that was landed right, I don't know, 20 feet from me. And it was purplish in color, and it was trying to blend in with the environment. And I could see the round outline first. And I saw that picture, and I was like, oh my gosh. And it actually was holding a weapon. The laser on the weapon was pointed, and it was aimed right at me, but I had just walked past it and took a picture. It was sort of like I felt like they were on guard, and they were there to protect the property, and they were ready to take me out if I was going to destroy the area or something. And I was, really scared that I had actually walked upon that right there. It was right there. And that picture's also on the website. But the interesting thing about this weapon, which I can't really make my mind wrap around this, these entities they're sitting on top of their little UFO, and they are holding like somebody would hold a hose. So he's holding it, and you can see the sharp point of where I guess lasers come out of. And I traced this cord, and it went all the way back behind him and up around behind him. And there was a large entity using a cloaking device, and they had a jacket on. And this entity was partially covered and partially not. And I could see like a snout, like a bear snout, sort of, but he was standing upright, and he had this cloak of invisibility wrapped around his jacket, but his arm was not covered. So you could see that he was wearing like a tan jacket overcoat thing, and he had a tan sleeve. You could see his arm, and then you could see him holding this cord that goes all the way around, which the aliens were aiming at me. It was very bizarre. I have that picture posted on there. It's a little hard to see, but you could see like quite a bit of stuff. So I decided to go back and tell her, hey, look what I found. I found this alien. And we were talking, and I was telling her about these sharp trees that were kind of by the house that were sharp. And she says, I want you to go down and just destroy them because they're sharp. People could fall on them and get hurt. And we did do that. I destroyed them. And I got in trouble for that. So the area, I call it the corridor because it runs alongside the house. It had an alien entity that came up out of an area that had these wood spikes around it, like a defense mechanism. And I could tell right away, empathically, I knew right away these were defense mechanisms, and they were using it to keep predators away. It was unusually placed for sure. And I got that on my website, and I took pictures of that. So I destroyed both domains or whatever. I was just trying to take it down, not really thinking much of it. I go back into the house talking with my friend, and I leave for work. It was like an hour later, and I get into my car, and my jacket was folded on itself, and it was smoldering, and it smelled like acetone. The closest thing I could say, it smelled like nail polish remover. So I know I didn't have that in my car. I know I don't have anything in my car. So my car is pretty clean. I have nothing in the car. And I had my jacket, and the arm was folded over itself, and I could see it smoking. And so I hurried up and ripped it apart because it was going to glue itself together. And I didn't know how even that happened. And I got in there, and immediately I saw that I had destroyed that, and they went after me. It was a warning shot. It was a warning shot not to do that.
Again, you have such, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. You have such amazing stories. You have this, we're trying to just keep up here with you. We might have to do a second interview with you because we're actually running out of time. But oh my God, that is awesome. Like so many different experiences. That is so crazy.
These are all first-time experiences that have never been heard before.
No, that's really cool. Can you drop your website for everybody so you could find your books?
www.dakotamchristian.com, all one word. Books and the pictures, everything there.
I remember the story that you told us about the cats that were cut in half, if I remember.
Yes.
And I also heard that from this guy that I told you before, Joseph Zene. Maybe I will send you some information about that. Or maybe you can tell him more about that. Maybe I will connect you guys.
Sure.
That'd be cool.
both of you.
Sounds good.
Okay,
All right.
please stay with us for 2 more minutes, okay?